Brighton Cove was a quiet coastal town, nestled between rugged cliffs and the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The town was small, with just over 1,000 residents who lived their lives in harmony with the sea that sustained them. Fishermen set out early each morning, casting their nets into the cold, dark waters, while their wives tended to homes and children. The sea was their livelihood, their tradition, their life. It was during the last week of September when the first signs appeared. The air was crisp with the onset of autumn, and the ocean seemed to hold a deeper chill than usual. At night, the waves whispered against the shore in an eerie, almost beckoning tone, a sound that lingered in the minds of the town's residents long after the sun had risen. Mrs. Adelaide Thorne was the first. A widow in her 60s, she had lived in Brighton Cove all her life. That morning, she was seen walking down the cobblestone path that led to the beach, dressed in her Sunday best, a faint smile playing on her lips. She walked with a purpose, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. She did not stop when her feet touched the wet sand, nor when the cold surf washed over her shoes. She continued, wading deeper and deeper until the ocean swallowed her whole. There were no screams, no frantic cries for help, just the image of her head disappearing beneath the waves. The townspeople were shaken, but rationalized it as an accident or a moment of despair. After all, Mrs. Thorne had been alone for many years. Loneliness, they said, can drive a person to do strange things. Days passed and the incident began to fade from memory. But then it happened again. This time, it was young Daniel Evans, a bright-eyed boy of only 9 years. His mother found his bed empty one morning, and after a frantic search they found small footprints leading from their home to the shore. His small body was discovered floating a mile off the coast later that day, his face serene, as if in peaceful slumber. The town mourned, but the unease grew. How could a child so full of life walk willingly into the sea? The whispers began, rumors of something unnatural lurking in the waters, something calling to the townspeople. Within a week, 2 more were lost to the ocean, a fisherman named Isaac Bell and a schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Clark. Both were seen walking towards the water in the early morning hours, their expressions blank, their movements as if under a trance. Their bodies were never recovered. The town was gripped by fear. Families began locking their doors and windows at night, keeping a close watch on loved ones. The once thriving streets became deserted after sundown, and a palpable tension hung in the air, thick as the mist that often rolled in from the sea. As October crept in, the disappearances increased. It was no longer just the old or the young. Men and women of all ages were being drawn to the ocean. The town doctor, Harold Price, took it upon himself to investigate, but his efforts were in vain. There was no pattern, no warning signs. The only commonality was the sea and the irresistible pull it seemed to exert. Dr. Price interviewed those who had been close to the victims in their final days. They spoke of a change, a distant look in their loved ones' eyes, as if they were listening to something only they could hear. Some mentioned dreams of the ocean, of being submerged in its depths, of hearing a voice calling them from beneath the waves. But when Dr. Price himself was found dead on the shore, having walked into the ocean in the dead of night, the town was left without answers, only more questions. The town descended into chaos. People began to flee, abandoning their homes in search of safety. But those who left Brighton Cove found no peace, as if the town's curse followed them wherever they went. A few who escaped were later found wandering into rivers, lakes, and even fountains in distant cities, their minds lost to the same call that had claimed the others. Back in Brighton Cove, the situation grew worse. The nights were filled with the sounds of the sea, now louder, almost desperate. It was as if the ocean itself was hungry, demanding more souls. The townspeople who remained huddled together, but no one dared sleep. Exhaustion claimed them, one by one, until they too succumbed to the call. Among the last to resist was Father James Matthews, the town's priest. He prayed fervently, asking for divine intervention, for a way to break the hold the ocean had on his flock. But his prayers were met with silence. One evening, as he sat in the empty church, his head bowed in despair, he heard it, the voice, soft and soothing, promising peace, an end to the torment. It spoke of a world beneath the waves where the lost could be reunited with loved ones, where there was no pain, no suffering, only eternal rest. Father Matthews fought the urge with all his might, but he was old, and his will was weak. Tears streamed down his face as he realized he was no different from the others. He too was being called. That night, he walked the path to the sea, leaving the church doors open behind him. By November, Brighton Cove was nearly deserted. The once lively town had become a ghost town, the only sounds those of the wind and the waves. The few who remained were hollow shells, their eyes vacant, their bodies merely waiting for the inevitable. Among the last was Sarah, a young woman who had lost her entire family to the ocean's call. She had barricaded herself in her home, but it was only a matter of time. The dreams had started weeks ago. Dreams of her parents, her brother, all standing in the water, smiling, calling her name. She knew she was doomed. The pull was growing stronger with each passing hour. She could hear it now, even when awake, the ocean calling to her, whispering promises of peace, of reunion with her loved ones. She had resisted longer than most, but her strength was waning. On the final night, the voice grew insistent, no longer a whisper, but a command. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door and stepped outside. The streets were empty, the air cold. She walked slowly, her steps deliberate, as if in a trance. The beach was eerily quiet, the sea calm. She saw them as she reached the shore, her parents, her brother, even friends she had lost. They stood in the shallow water, smiling, their eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. They beckoned to her, their voices carried on the breeze. "It's time, Sarah," they said in unison. "Join us." She waded into the water, the coldness numbing her senses. The waves lapped at her legs, and as she moved deeper, the water embraced her, pulling her closer to the depths. Her heart raced, but her mind was calm. She was going home. As the water closed over her head, she saw them clearly now, their hands outstretched, welcoming her. She took one last breath, feeling the cold rush into her lungs. And then there was nothing, only the deep, dark sea and the silence of the abyss. Brighton Cove was no more. The town, once alive with the laughter of children and the bustle of daily life, was now a place of death and despair. The building stood empty, slowly crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. The sea, which had once been the town's lifeblood, now seemed to guard its secrets, the waves crashing against the shore as if in mourning. But if one were to stand on the beach, late at night, when the world was quiet, they might hear it, a whisper, faint but persistent, carried on the wind. It was the ocean, calling out to those who would listen, promising solace, peace, an end to all suffering. And somewhere, in the dark, cold depths, the lost souls of Brighton Cove drifted endlessly, their faces serene, their minds at rest. They had answered the call, and in the embrace of the deep, they had found what they had been searching for, a final, eternal sleep. Yet the ocean was never truly satisfied. It would wait, as it always had, for new souls to wander too close, to hear the call that could not be resisted. And when they did, Brighton Cove would claim them too, one by one, until the sea was full and the world above was empty. The call of the deep never ended. It would echo through time, through generations, as long as there were ears to hear and hearts to be broken. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short, scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire.